Welcome to episode 5 in our Let's Talk About Sex series. Today we are discussing the topic of birth trauma and sex. So this is going to be a really important topic for women to listen to if it feels important and necessary for you. Enjoy.
Hey mama, I'm sending you wonderful pregnancy vibes. It's time for you to guide you through. Let's take some time for you. It's pregnancy with Physio Laura.
Hello mamas and welcome back to episode 5, which is our final episode in this Let's Talk About Sex series. Now today we are talking with Nisha Gill all about birth trauma and sex. Now, I think it goes without saying, given the title of this podcast, please use your own discernment and judgment before listening to this podcast. We're obviously talking about trauma, so I don't think you would have clicked on this episode if you didn't want to listen to it, but when you feel ready to listen to it, make sure you listen to it. When you don't feel ready to listen to it, if it feels too raw or too triggering for you right now, that's totally cool. Just shove it to the side. You listen to it when you feel ready to. So I think that goes without saying, but I just wanted to mention that anyway. Now remember, Nisha Gill, she's been on the podcast for the last 2 episodes. If you haven't already checked them out, do go and check them out. She talks about women and pleasure. She talks about navigating sex after birth. Such great episodes. And in the first 2 episodes, I go solo and tell you all about how women's health physios can help you. So we talk about changes in the body that you can expect that may affect your sex life. We talk about all of the strategies I walk women through to help manage painful sex and navigate painful sex, super practical tips and tools. So if that interests you, that's in episode 2, go check that out. But today we're talking all about birth trauma and sex, and it's a really important topic. So just a reminder, Nisha is our holistic trauma and perinatal practitioner, and she's joined us for the final 3 episodes in this podcast series, and she really specializes in supporting women to experience their potency through the profound intelligence of their bodies. So much of her work is with women with birth trauma and helping them to settle back into their bodies and helping them to debrief their births, helping them to navigate their births and really feel the emotions they have around their birth. And I think I couldn't think of a more perfect person to talk about this topic with. I think she is so highly intelligent and really, really helpful at navigating what birth trauma is. And what I want to pull out from this podcast series, just as a little, introduction to it, is the way she defines birth trauma. And I think this is going to help a lot of women, but I quote her. She says, "It's not what it looks like on the outside, but what it feels like on the inside." And that blew my mind because so many of us downplay our birth experiences. We know, by the way, that 1 in 3 women report birth trauma, and that's just what's reported, which is mind-blowingly not good that many people are experiencing birth trauma. But so many people downplay what they think birth trauma is because if they haven't had what we call a capital T trauma, like something really significantly bad happened to them, they think, oh, you know what? I'm healthy. My baby's healthy. I can't complain. I couldn't possibly have had birth trauma. Like how indulgent that must feel. But it's not at all what it is on the outside. It's how you feel on the inside. And I think that's really validating for a lot of women to understand that it does not matter what happened to you. It's about how you feel about it. So Nisha talks in this episode about the importance of being and feeling safe, seen, and soothed. And that if you don't feel safe, seen, or soothed, that can equal trauma for a lot of women. So trauma does not look the same for every person. And a lot of women may not even know they've had trauma, but they might just be feeling weird, symptoms of phased out or brain foggy or even hyper alert and anxious. And it's because something has happened to you that you now cannot integrate properly in your body. So it's about something's happened and you haven't been able to process the emotions around that. That is birth trauma. Well, that is trauma, full stop, but that is birth trauma when it's happened to you about your birth. So I'm not going to talk anymore because Nisha is so much better at this, but I just wanted to give you a little lead up. In case you thought this episode wasn't for you, I actually think this episode applies to more people than you probably realize. Again, if we know that 1 in 3 report birth trauma, we know that so many more are actually probably experiencing it. So I think this is a good episode for those women that go, oh, actually, I feel a little bit off after birth. I feel like something's not quite right. Maybe you haven't integrated something properly. I think this episode would be really, really helpful for you. So definitely check it out. I'd love to hear from you over on my socials at Physio Laura to know what your experience of navigating birth trauma after birth was, what helped you, and especially how you navigated that with sex. And that's going to be something Nisha obviously touches on today. So enjoy this episode, ladies. And again, if you want to access that bonus audio track from Nisha, go and join my online membership program, The Pregnancy Posse, thepregnancyposse.com. You can find out all the info, but let's jump right in. Today is a really important topic and I know you're going to love it. Enjoy. Nisha, I want to talk to you because this is a real specialty area of yours. And I think you have a real passion, obviously, for working in this area and a real ability to make women feel comfortable and safe. And we want to talk about birth trauma because we know that, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the stats at the moment are 1 in 3 women will experience birth trauma of some sort. So I know a lot of women may listen to this first of all and go, oh, it doesn't apply to me. I didn't have any birth trauma. But I'd actually really love to hear from you what your definition of birth trauma is, because I understand it's such a big spectrum and it's not just the big classical things that we might think is birth trauma. So some women may think they didn't have any birth trauma, but when they really sit with it, it may actually be a different story. So I'd love for you to unpack what you think birth trauma is and how you define it.
It's a huge topic. How long have we got? So, there's a more neurobiological definition of trauma is when something's happened that's too much for us to cope with. Our coping bandwidth doesn't allow us to deal with it in the moment. It comes too suddenly at us and everything's happening too fast for us to integrate. Now, that's one definition. And so what happens is the threat detector in our brain kind of keeps going beep, 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 not settling, gives us the illusion that that threat is continuing in present time. And so we continue to brace, we continue to be on hyper alert or completely numbed out in the freeze response and dissociated from our bodies, not quite there, brain foggy, which can also be sleep deprivation, of course. But that's one way of looking at it. So there's that sense of incompleteness in the system and how to help the nervous system recalibrate, reset. That's one piece. There's also this idea that it doesn't have to be the extreme end where there's a whole lot of drama and, pain and things going wrong in birth, wrong in inverted commas. It may just be a sense of something not having settled from the birthing experience, like something being out of kilter, like, when you actually needed your partner or your midwife, your doula, or somebody right there giving you some kind of emotional support, and they just weren't. They weren't there to see you and help you feel the words are safe, seen, and soothed. So actually feeling safe, and then lots of ways to create safety in a birthing space. Feel seen. So if you're feeling like you're really struggling, hitting that crisis of confidence, that they really get that and they were there right with you, or attempt to help you feel soothed. If some of that is missing, then there's that sense of I wasn't really met on a deeper level in this huge experience that I was having. And once again, that lingering sense can remain. And it doesn't have to be that big T trauma where it's very visible, but it's just that kind of cumulative pattern of a few of these things put together just make you feel that lack of settling after an experience. And let's face it, every birth is big. No matter how blissful it might look from the outside. You can have a home birth under the moon with, with everything as you'd wanted, but it's still a big experience. There's still that sense of needing to come back and settle, and that settling piece is where I often pitch the work. But then it's also, we do want to sometimes make sense of these experiences when we're in that state. Sometimes the whole experience becomes quite fragmented. Firstly, where we might be in very primal space if all the birthing hormones are on our side, but also if it's just a bit overwhelming, then it can become like survival physiology where we're in fight, flight, freeze mode, and the conscious memories don't get laid down. So things are just very hazy and kind of floaty, and even the memories of what exactly happened can be a little bit disconnected, and that can give us an uneasy feeling about what actually happened in there. Like, yeah, so it doesn't kind of help us move forward, and just that lingering sense of something hasn't just clicked into place. I think birth is a little different to other kinds of trauma because we do expect to go into primal space, and this whole brain chemistry thing that plays out, and the nervous system, very primal. So there's a lot of overlays happening there. But as well as that, of course, in this day and age, there is, you said 1 in 3. I would say it's actually at the tip of the iceberg. That's my anecdotal sense. Of course, I see people with trauma, but the fact that, yes, it is more highly correlated with intervention, but it doesn't mean that every cesarean birth is going to be traumatic either, right?
Sure.
In fact, they've found that instrumental, as in episiotomy and vacuum extraction, more highly correlated with trauma than certainly than scheduled cesareans, which kind of stands to reason. Anyhow, so it's not what it looks like from the outside, it's what it feels like from the inside, which is why I find some, social media groups where there's a lot of comparisonitis about people's trauma. There's a tendency to minimize what our experience was, and just because it looks from the outside that she over there should be more scarred from her experience than I am from mine, that we kind of want to look normal and not make a fuss and put one foot in front of the other and keep going. And the experience is not just fragmenting, it's very isolating when we're in survival physiology. It's very hard to reach out and ask for the support that we need. It's just how it is, like our physiology almost hijacks us from having that choice. So we kind of in this kind of tunnel vision, as I said before. What happens as a result is, you may have sleep disturbance. It's this hyperreactivity in your system, or the other end of things might mean that we're really not fully there, like we're in this floaty state. And again, you have to take out the layers of sleep deprivation, exhaustion, and postnatal depletion, all those things. To me, signs like depression, anxiety, symptoms like that, often misdiagnosed as standalone postnatal depression, postnatal anxiety. Often they're symptoms of trauma. Really, they are. It's the hypo and hyperarousal, and often swinging between the two. And the two go together. So this dysregulated nervous system, unsettled nervous system, where we've lost a level of resilience in our ability to cope with more stress, is going to play out as birth trauma. And there are many ways of dealing with that, but I've got my biases there. Yeah, I'm not sure that fully answers it. There's a lot more to say about it, but yeah.
I think that's a really good synopsis of it. And it just makes me wonder how many women who have typical healthy baby, healthy mom, maybe low intervention births, how many of those women have birth trauma but fly under the radar? Because like you said, it's minimized that if you don't have the big capital T cesarean, episiotomy, vacuum, or whatever it is, but maybe it was that you weren't, safe, seen, and soothed. So maybe you weren't listened to, or maybe you didn't feel safe, and maybe you didn't feel heard. And I can 100% see how women would just go, oh, well, my baby was healthy. I was healthy. I had a vaginal birth. Well, I don't have trauma. What there's to worry about? But if I just want to say, like, all those women just kind of dysregulated, but don't feel they have permission to say that maybe they do have birth trauma. And I think it's really good to highlight that, trauma can look so different. It doesn't, I think a lot of women don't think trauma is a vaginal birth, for example, regardless of whether there's interventions. I think some people think a traumatic birth is only a cesarean section. And I think it's just really cool to break that down and let women know that trauma is unique to you, and it doesn't actually matter what happens on the outside. Like you said, some people can have C-sections or whatever the intervention is, and they can have no trauma because they felt safe, seen, and soothed. And I really like those 3 S's. That's a great way to have to think about it. So let's say someone has acknowledged that they do think they are processing some trauma after birth. How does that then play out with returning to sex after birth? You know, obviously we're going to think that there's going to be some difficulties there, but what sort of consequences does birth trauma then have on someone's sexuality, how they feel about their pelvic region, how they go returning to sex with a partner?
I mean, as you would expect, there would be this reactivity, this tendency to be on guard and protecting the body, protecting itself from any intrusions, if you like. And so there would be that. And it's a very primal, unconscious way of responding, because that is survival physiology. That is our animal body protecting us. And the more we tense up, the more painful any approach, of any finger, penis, anything, tampon even, or anything we insert into parts of our bodies. And of course, scar tissue, like a cesarean scar, also can trigger a lot of memories of the experience, because the memories often in traumatic experiences are very held in the body rather than just the conscious memories that you and I think of. So to unravel that is firstly just having the understanding around what happened in terms of nervous system and how our survival physiology did its best to protect us, but then kept on overdrive. And so this hyperreactivity, hypervigilance that continues is not their choice, and not to be shaming themselves and feeling guilty, which is a natural tendency. But both partners understanding that piece is so important, because in isolation, it can just land into the ether on the other side, because until that person the partner actually understands what the dynamic is, then it's going to be very hard to get the buy-in without blame, shame, and all those things, because that's it's a very delicate space, as you can imagine, on so many counts. And most partners don't certainly like to be involved in any kind of therapy, but just having some neutral space. And when I work, I often start online, because it feels less threatening than to be dragged in by the birthing person to therapist's room, just for that educational piece, so they can then go in, mull over how that's playing out in their lives. And then that whole idea of gently coming together and using lots of creativity in basically, maintaining the loving connection, but also having their sexual needs met in whatever way that couple feels is okay between them. There is no right and wrong, absolutely no right and wrong, as far as I'm concerned. In this realm, it's where it's consensual. And and as I said before too, sometimes, I mean, even in the birthing experience, our attachment wounds show up. So I work a lot with developmental early trauma, and that can certainly rise its head in the birthing experience, where everything's rearranging, and things we do to hold it all together and clamp down on those feelings and sensations, well, they come rising to the surface. And in that space, and there can be a lot of reactivity between the couple. Sometimes it may be the non-birthing parent who's more traumatized, because they've witnessed maybe baby being resuscitated and all those things. I should put a disclaimer here that if anyone's triggered by any descriptions, to really look after themselves and maybe pause the video if they're watching, or the audio, and find ways to ground. I usually start any discussion of trauma in that way. That's the gentle way to start. And any kind of exploration then, there's lots of baby steps to start to reconnect, but it may mean for a time taking penetrative sex completely off the agenda, because what we want to build is safety and trust. So if there's no absolute safety and trust, where the birthing person can say no and know that that boundary is being honored 100%, 1000%, then they cannot have true safety and trust. They might go along, they might say, well, okay, but it's actually a clamping down, because they're not okay. They're not okay with that. And the body knows that the caring good wife, who may be even fearful of losing her partner, I should say, their love or their connection, or worried about them going elsewhere to get their needs met, all those things come into it sometimes. And we do things that override our body's natural yes and no just to keep the connection sometimes. That backfires more often than not when we can't be completely honest. It catches up at some level. Yeah, so it has to be very gradual, that coming together in ways that maybe approach the kind of sex that they want to be having. But as I said, in the meantime, there's this opportunity to explore whole new ways, and we are really as limited as our imaginations. That much I know for a fact.
Yeah.
So it's such an opportunity to discover ourselves and our bodies in ways we just would not have imagined. It doesn't mean going off to a long weekend of whatever kind of training you might in sexuality. It can be just ever so gentle and loving and rich and lush, and who doesn't want that?
You're selling it to me. Just before we wrap up, Nisha, I just wanted to touch lastly on, I know we're talking about the woman and the birthing mother because, birth is happening to her body. And so birth trauma can very greatly affect her. But like you touched on just briefly, the partner can sometimes feel birth trauma because they may have witnessed something quite scary, or they felt unsafe, on behalf of their partner, or whatever it may be. But do you see this a lot where partners also suffer birth trauma? And if so, do you find they often find it hard to talk about because they maybe minimize their trauma because it's not them that was giving birth?
Absolutely. You just said it so beautifully. Yeah, they do. Just for the example I used before, where one person's witnessing all that's going on in the birthing space and the interventions and the near misses, if you like, let's just call it that. And the others kind of maybe oblivious for whatever reasons. Maybe they've been, they're just recovering. They're completely probably stunned and on some level about what's going on and not really that aware. So yeah, the partner can very much be the one who witnesses more of what's going on, and that sense of helplessness, because there's a natural tendency for wanting to help somebody that we love and rescue them in some way. That is very primal and natural, but they have to thwart it because one part of them, the thinking brain realizes, well, this is necessary to get to Z, so we have to suppress our natural tendency, and that in itself can cause like a real unsettling in the nervous system. But beyond that, as you indicated, that sense of needing to soldier on, we can't be complaining because they did the birthing and they're the ones who queen bee, and they need to be looked after, and I can't afford to be in touch with my feelings. And of course, a lot of people aren't in touch with their feelings or don't give themselves permission to express. I can't make a fuss. We need to keep putting one foot in front of the other. But the reality is, their trauma is everyone's trauma, just as the birthing person's is, or the baby can have trauma being born, because they're all in this soup together, and if one is affected, the ripples are just there and they're all swimming around in it. So there's this downward spiral and level of how settled they are in themselves, and whether this pattern continues to pervade the family home, or whether they start to thrive and they unravel some of this and go in the other direction. So I very much involve, if I'm actually doing birth preparation with couples, to the extent of asking the partners about their own birth experience, if they know about that, their attitude to birth, and also really encouraging them to be well rested and looking after themselves in the whole piece, not just before, very much before approaching birth, but also in the postpartum. They can't be running ragged thinking that they can be the sole carer for this mother and baby in the postpartum. It's not how it's meant to be, let's just say.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's really good. That would definitely speak to a lot of people, I think, who feel like they can't feel that. But like you're saying, it's so important. Everyone needs to be doing well in that dynamic for everyone to be thriving. So you can't just have one person, really suffering to try and prop someone else up. It just doesn't work, does it? We need to have that
No.
whole family dynamic working.
Yeah.
I could talk to you all day. I feel like I've only just scratched the surface of so many things, but we'll wrap it up there, Nisha. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. I just know that this will be really, really valuable conversation starters, like really sowing some seeds for women to start thinking about what sex could look like after birth. And I just think that's so important preparatory work to
Mm.
do during pregnancy so that women can have these really wonderful postpartum experiences. So thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for the invitation. And I really welcome any questions, any dialogue from your listeners as well at any point, because I love, just being there and responding to real needs. So yeah, thank you again, Laura.
Thank you, Nisha. Hi, ladies. I really, really hope that if you needed to hear this podcast today, that it really did land on you like it landed on me when I listened to it from Nisha. There's so many nuggets of gold in there that I went, like specifically the ones around how it's not what it looks like on the outside, it's how it feels on the inside. That was like a really big light bulb moment for me, because I thought in the past that trauma had to look like X, Y, and Z on paper. And now I realize that you can't judge anyone's trauma, because trauma is an internal, unique, personal experience. So just because you had a, water birth with fairy lights around you, that doesn't mean that that wasn't a traumatic experience. That could have still held some sort of trauma for you. And vice versa, you could have had an intense, rushing emergency C-section, and it may have been the most beautiful experience free from any trauma. So it doesn't have to look classically on paper what we think is trauma and what is not trauma. Again, it's so nice to know that no, trauma is internal. It does not matter what it looks like on the outside. And I think that's really important, as we touched on in this episode, about how partner trauma is also really important to be acknowledged and to help partners integrate their emotions, because that's what trauma is. I think trauma, people think big, heavy things, but trauma, thinking about it, like Nisha said, is just a lack of integration for your emotions is so important. And I know I've worked through a lot of this just in parenting awareness, and just a lot of the podcasts and books and things I've read on parenting. It's just about helping our little ones process their emotions, because otherwise it can get stuck in their bodies and then they're not feeling it properly. And I know that so much of my parenting is about helping my kids process their emotions, and we need to do that as adults too. So I love this topic, and Nisha just articulates it so beautifully. So I really hope you resonated with it. Come and chat to me at PhysioLaura on my socials and let me know what you got out of today's podcast. I'd really love to hear from you and to know whether it helped you as well, and maybe what nuggets of gold you got from this episode. And if you want to check out Nisha and connect with her, she is over at feminine_instincts. You can definitely check her out. She is a wealth of knowledge. She has so many beautiful pieces of content that I think you're going to love. Thank you so much for being here for this amazing sex podcast series. It has been such a joy to bring these series to you. There are so many more amazing series lined up for this year. So make sure you subscribe to the Pregnancy with Physio Laura podcast so you don't miss out. And just a reminder that if you want to get these episodes straight up, rather than waiting for them to be released to the public, I release all of the episodes at the first episode drop to my Pregnancy Posse members. So rather than waiting 5 weeks to get all the episodes, you can consume them all at once inside my online membership. Plus, whenever we have any bonus tracks or videos or audio for this episode, for this series, we have that 30-minute audio track all about embodiment, settling, regulating our nervous system from Nisha. It's amazing. All my Pregnancy Posse members get access to that. And obviously, you get access to me. I answer all of your burning questions. I send videos when you signed up. I do Q&As every week. I educate you on all sorts of birth preparation, active birth, managing pelvic pain, managing back pain, how to prepare your mind and body for birth, how to manage rib pain, what compression garments to wear. All of the questions are inside my online membership. Plus, we do weekly workouts. So I really hope that if that sounds appealing to you, that you'll come and join us over at thatpregnancyposse.com. Otherwise, mamas, wherever you are today, I really hope that you are looking after you, and I will catch you soon for our next podcast series. Mwah!